This is a world run by specialists. Isn't that what we mean by scientific society? No, it isn't. A scientific society is one in which specialists can indeed do the things like making the electric light work, but it's you, it's I who have to know how nature works, how electricity is one of her expressions in the light and in my brain. And we are really here on a wonderful threshold of knowledge. The ascent of man is always teaching in the balance. There's always a sense of uncertainty as to whether, when man lifts his foot for the next step, it's really going to come down ahead. And what is ahead of us? At last, the bringing together of all that we've learned in physics and in biology towards an understanding of where we have come, what man is. Knowledge is not a loose-leaf notebook of facts. Above all, it is a responsibility for the integrity of what we are. Above all, of what we are as ethical creatures. You can't possibly maintain that if you let other people run the world for you while you yourself continue to live out of a rag bag of morals that come from past beliefs. I've been so optimistic about the ascent of man. Am I going to give up at this moment? Of course not. The ascent of man will go on. But don't assume that it will go on carried by Western civilization as we know it. We are being weighed in the balance at this moment. If we give up, the next step will be taken, but not by us. We have not been given any guarantee that Assyria and Egypt and Rome were not given. We are a scientific civilization. That means a civilization in which knowledge and its integrity are crucial. Science is only a Latin word for knowledge. And I'm infinitely saddened to find myself suddenly surrounded in the West by a sense of a terrible loss of nerve. A retreat from knowledge into what? Into Zen Buddhism. Into profound questions about, are we not just really animals at bottom? Into extrasensory perception, which simply do not lie along the line of what we are now able to know if we devote ourselves to it. An understanding of man himself. Self-knowledge, at last bringing together the experience of the arts and the explanations of science. I had not been long back from Hiroshima when I heard someone say in Szilard's presence that it was the tragedy of scientists that their discoveries were used for destruction. Szilard replied, as he, more than anyone else, had the right to reply, that it was not the tragedy of scientists, it is the tragedy of mankind. There are two parts to the human dilemma. One is the belief that the end justifies the means. That push-button philosophy, that deliberate deafness to suffering has become the monster in the war machine. The other is the betrayal of the human spirit. The assertion of dogma that closes the mind and turns a nation, a civilization, into a regiment of ghosts, obedient ghosts or tortured ghosts. It's said that science will dehumanize people and turn them into numbers. That's false, tragically false. Look for yourself. This is the concentration camp and crematorium at Auschwitz. This is where people were turned into numbers. Into this pond were flushed the ashes of some 4 million people. And that was not done by gas. It was done by arrogance, it was done by dogma, it was done by ignorance. When people believe that they have absolute knowledge with no test in reality, this is how they behave. This is what men do when they aspire to the knowledge of gods. Science is a very human form of knowledge. We are always at the brink of the known. We always feel forward for what is to be hoped. Every judgment in science stands on the edge of error and is personal. Science is a tribute to what we can know, although we are fallible. In the end, the words were said by Oliver Cromwell. I beseech you in the bowels of Christ, think it possible you may be mistaken. I owe it as a scientist to my friend Leo Szilard. I owe it as a human being to the many members of my family who died here, to stand here as a survivor and a witness. We have to cure ourselves of the itch for absolute knowledge and power. We have to close the distance between the push-button order and the human act. We have to touch people.